Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Chapter 17. When Detective Lieutenant Vito Branco of the Boston Police entered the mansion, I was still upstairs in the second-floor hallway with Daphne. The small gang of local police up there provided a kind of cover for us as we watched Branco coming up the stairs. When he arrived at the second floor landing, he stood for a moment and surveyed the scene. Daphne gasped in my ear, "Goodness!" I had to agree with her. Branco's 6-foot frame always seemed larger than life, partly because of his classic proportions and partly because of his absolute masculinity. His clothes barely concealed a musculature that would have kept Michelangelo busy at the chisel, and depending on the light and Branco's emotional state, his eyes could be an austere and impenetrable gray, or else a cool but more inviting slate blue. His big white teeth luminesced occasionally through one of his rare wry smiles. Hair, dark and curly, in spite of being trimmed short and neat, and his skin glowed with a lustrous Mediterranean olive tone that complemented the bluish cast of his beard and the sleek black hair on his forearms. I could write a book, but after that morning, I watched him from the safety of Daphne's company. Yes, safety, for with Branco I always felt on the brink of emotional danger, like Tatiana trembling at Onegин's arrival. It wasn't as though Branco and I didn't know each other. In fact, he and Nicole had dated for a while, so in a sense Branco was like family, or so I tried to convince myself. But my nether instincts, the ones unrelated to familial bonds, always seemed inclined otherwise. The Abigail cops filled Branco in on what they'd done so far, which was very little. Still not noticing me or Daphne, Branco went into the bedroom, and I heard him say loudly, "Who are these people?" Bruce, David, and the maestro were still in there. Apparently, the Abigail police had been too zealous about not touching or moving a thing for the Boston cops, including the two people still in the bedroom, and very possibly in shock. Their laissez-faire decision bordered on irresponsible. Daphne whispered to me, "We better go help the maestro." "Are you sure?" I said. "I'll be fine," she replied. "Just keep my face turned away from the blood. Don't let me look at it, or I may go out again." She set herself in a self-protective stance by turning her head and looking over her tight shoulder. "I'm ready," she said, as though prepared to undergo a session of semi-conscious neurosurgery. I led her by her left hand to the doorway of the bedroom, but there I had to pause for an unexpected tableau before me. Bruce David was still kneeling at Marcella Ostanada's bedside, and with his torso thrown over the bloody sheets. Lieutenant Branco was crouched over him, straddling him from behind, tugging at his arms and trying to untangle his hands from the sheets. I could hear Branco talking softly to Bruce, murmuring persuasively with a father's care, urging the prostrate tenor to come on and be good and let go, and everything would be all right if he'd just listen and cooperate. Only a fool would comply too soon. "What's wrong?" Daphne murmured, her head still turned away from the scene. "Nothing," I answered with a strange green-eyed hoarseness in my voice. The other cops were moving the maestro away from the bed. That was our cue. "Here we go," I said. As I led Daphne into the bedroom, Branco changed his stance and was now grasping Bruce David's body in a full bear hug from behind. Then in one mighty haul he lifted him off the blood-soaked sheets. Damn lucky bastard. That tenor. Meanwhile, I kept Daphne's head averted from the bed so she missed Branco's pas-de-deux with Bruce. She and I had just intercepted the other cops and were trying to balance the enfeebled maestro between us when I heard Bruce David let out a loud wail. I looked his way and saw that he had turned himself around to face Branco and had thrown himself into the lieutenant's arms. To an uninformed viewer, it could have appeared a passionate embrace, at least from one party's side. That's precisely when Branco looked over Bruce's shoulder and finally saw me. "Stan?" he said, amazed. "Hi, Lieutenant." I tried to wave, but both my arms were occupied, one supporting the maestro and the other averting Daphne's head from the sightline of center stage. "Looks like you've got your hands full," I said. Branco smirked and replied, "What the hell are you doing here?" "Wigs for the opera." Daphne managed to glance toward Branco, and I quickly steered her and the maestro away, like waltzing two people at once around the floor. But Daphne, like any mortal who tries too hard to avoid something, found herself facing directly toward the forbidden letto di morte. She got herself a good eyeful of the bloody remains lying there, and once it all registered, she lost her footing and began to slump and sink forward toward the floor. In an instant, Branco saw what was happening. He dropped Bruce David and ran to Daphne's rescue. Before her body touched the floor, Branco caught her in his powerful arms and scooped her up. Daphne gazed into Branco's eyes and gave a beatific smile. "Thank you, officer," she said. Branco led the way out, carrying Daphne in his arms. He had miraculously escaped Bruce David's clutch with nary a smudge of blood on him. Easy work for a god. I followed close behind Branco and Daphne, with the maestro still leaning on me. Meanwhile, abandoned by his savior, Bruce David lay blubbering on the bedroom floor. I glanced back at him. "Easy come, easy go, pal." The local cops then hauled him to his feet and dragged him wailing from the bedroom behind the rest of us. Branco settled Daphne onto the hallway divan while I put the maestro in a nearby armchair. I asked him if he wanted a cigarette, since I was finally prepared to light it with the big flick. But he waved me off, as though irritated with himself for requiring so much attention. Didn't he see that attending him and Daphne was a welcome respite from the only alternative at the moment, the messy corpse on the bed? With the bit players all safely out of the way, the long, slow arm of the law, in this case the country medical examiner, could perform her duties with the star attraction, Marcella Ostanata, deceased, and I got to rekindle the connection between me and the lieutenant. "We've missed you at the shop," I said. Branco nodded ruefully. "I lost my parents a few months ago, about 2 weeks apart." "Wow," I said quietly. "I'm sorry." Branco said, "There was no sickness and nobody suffered. And that's how they lived their whole life, clean and orderly." "I wish I'd known." Branco waved me off. "It's over now." "Nicole will feel bad." "I wanted to be alone," he said. "I took some time off, went away, didn't tell anyone where I was." He forced a smile. "It didn't help much. Anyway, they left a little money for me and my brother. My sister got the house. So I bought a small place in the South End." He laughed and shook his head. "A real fixer-upper. It needs a lot of work, but it has a nice backyard, so someday I'll have a garden and a clothesline." This was a beefy Italian cop talking. "And one good thing," he went on, "I spend so much time making it homey, I can't get too bogged down thinking about other things. It's better that way." "Maybe Nicole could help you decorate." "When the time comes," said Branco. "Maybe, but for now." He faltered a moment, looking for the right words, usually a sign that someone is trying to temper the emotional content of his message. Branco finally said, "Nicole is a wonderful woman, but I'm sure you'd agree that she isn't very domestic." "True," I said. The only household appliance Nicole could operate was the telephone. Branco said, "All I've been doing for the past month is hammering and swinging and painting. As far as I can recall, that's not her ideal of a good time." "But when day is done, Lieutenant, she's still a woman." A mischievous gleam appeared in Branco's eyes. "And I'm sure we'll still be friends." The Abigail Country Medical Examiner interrupted us to say that as far as she could determine, Marcella Ostanata had bled to death from a fatal wound in her neck. She sure had learned a lot in medical school. The wound had been inflicted with an extremely well-honed, high-quality knife, like the ones found in any gourmet's kitchen, and whoever had done the deed had wielded the knife like an expert. One sure swipe was all it had taken. No jagged edges, she said. No amateur sawing, just one nice clean cut, like gutting a fish. Branco looked at her coldly without a word. The examiner continued her barbaric saga with obvious relish. The spillage was contained by using the sheets as sponges. Otherwise, those jets of blood from the carotids would have hit the ceiling. The whole area around the bed would have been splattered. Enough, said Branco. Just tell me how you're so sure of the murder weapon. Did you see it? Said the examiner. Branco gave her a searching look. The examiner responded with a smug grin. How could you miss it? It's right there by the pillow. Thank you, said Branco. I'll take over now. I was about to tell him about the knife that the maestro had been holding it earlier, but the police sergeant from Abigail interrupted. He'd apparently overheard the exchange, and either he was embarrassed by the country examiner's behavior, or else he wanted to gain brownie points with the big shot Boston cop. He said to Branco, I'll help you any way I can, Lieutenant. Good, said Branco. Then he went into the bedroom, and I followed. A police photographer had set up lights and was preparing to take pictures of the death scene. Elsewhere, officers were looking for evidence, dusting for fingerprints, taking notes. Branco studied the dead woman with what seemed like more than clinical interest, the same way people often look at corpses at a wake, as though they are trying somehow to associate with the body. Then he looked up suddenly toward the French doors that opened onto the second floor terrazzo. He aimed his question to everyone working in the bedroom. Were these doors open? The cops replied variously, like obedient schoolchildren, saying things like, Yes, sir. And we haven't moved a thing. Branco went out through the French doors, and I followed. The broad terrazzo ran along the entire back of the house. While Branco surveyed the open space out there, he stroked his chin. He seemed to enjoy palpitating the strong, angular bone under the flesh. He said, Anyone whose room opens onto this balcony could have got into that bedroom. But why would she leave the doors open, I said. I thought any diva with her diamonds avoided the night air. Maybe she was expecting someone, said Branco. Who? That's what I intend to find out. He faced me and added, Could have been anyone in this house for that matter. Don't look at me, Lieutenant. Where were you when this happened? Having breakfast outside with Daphne. Her man, Parker, can vouch for both of us. At least for the time the body was found, said Branco. Lieutenant, I get my revenge with scissors, not a knife. Easy, Stan. I don't suspect you. 3 strikes and I'm out, huh? Branco sniggered. This isn't a game. I told him what I'd seen earlier, that the maestro had been holding the bloody knife at Madama's bedside. I figured that, said Branco. I saw some blood on his hands when I walked into the room. But you told the examiner. He cut me off. I know what I said. He looked over the edge of the terrazzo to the soft grass of the lawns far below. You think someone climbed up here from down there? I said. Branco countered. There's no evidence of an anchor for a rope, no scratches or chips in the marble. I reminded him of a wacko rock climber I'd once met in Yosemite National Park. He could have scaled the columns to the second story terrazzo with one arm and a leg tied together. Branco responded to my theory with one of his manly grunts. Lieutenant, there's a whole cast of characters connected with this opera festival, and they're not even staying here at the house. Maybe one of them drove up here and killed that woman, then went back to town. He dismissed it. Someone would have heard the car. Maybe they drove part way and then walked. Possibly, he said. Maybe going into town now and meeting those other characters isn't a bad idea. Give these folks a little time to settle down before I question them. They're in no condition to talk from now anyway. He turned to go back into the house, and he said to me, You want to come along? With you? Branco's eyes glittered in the morning light. No one else, he said, flatly. Maybe you could tell me your version of things on the way to town. Sure, I said, eager to play his Girl Friday. Branco instructed his assisting sergeant to begin questioning the people at Daphne's place as soon as they could tolerate it and still give coherent information. Then he and I left the house together and headed toward his car. When Daphne saw me walking out with Branco, a weary frown wrinkled her brow. I waved back cheerily to assure her I was still her ally and that this escapade with the police, or more specifically with Lieutenant Branco, was on friendly terms. For his part, Branco seemed to have loosened up since the last time I saw him. Maybe the recent brush with mortality and the death of his parents had caused it. Or maybe being out of Boston, out of range of headquarters, he felt he could relax his cop behavior a little. One thing was sure, he'd become more humane. As we approached Branco's car, Maurizio spied us, gave a look of fright, and then vanished into the nearby greenery. "Who's that?" said Branco. "The handyman," I replied. The corners of Branco's mouth curled slightly. "Another conquest?" "Hardly," I said in full denial of the facts. "What is it with you and these ethnic rascals?" said Branco. "You got some kind of magnet for them?" "Yeah," I said, "a big bar magnet." Branco grimaced, and I regretted my remark. It was a leftover reflex from those times when every word was intended to provoke him. Branco said, "I thought you offered something a little closer to the heart." "I've got that too, Lieutenant." He nodded toward where Maurizio had vanished into the shrubbery. "I'll question that guy later." Meanwhile, my higher self screamed, "Change the subject!" Getting into the Alpha and closing the doors didn't help at all, though, for I suddenly found myself shoulder to shoulder with the cop. Now, I don't own a car, but no sooner was I seated in the passenger seat of Branco's Alfa Romeo than I understood all those movies and songs that ever used a car as a prop, a kind of aphrodisiac setting for romance and adventure. Maybe that's why it had taken me so long to find love, because I didn't own a car. Yep, there I was, right in Branco's love capsule. I could feel the warmth of his body near me and smell the clean, starched cotton of his shirt and the scent of balsam that always seemed to emanate from the man, like Sophie Loren trapped with Gregory Peck in Arabesque. I pressed myself against the door, trying in vain to put a little more space between us. He said, "Got enough room?" "Sure," I lied. He put the Alpha into reverse and grazed my knee roughly with his hand. I flinched, but not out of fear. My face flushed, and I turned my head toward the open window. With the cool air blowing on my face, it was only a few moments before my left brain functions were restored. Then I saw and smelled that the Alpha seats had been reupholstered in soft tan leather, and new carpeting and sisal mats had been laid on the floorboard. Not all of Branco's money was going into his vine-covered cottage. While we zoomed toward town and the performance center, I gave him my version of what I'd seen and heard at the Opera House in the preceding days, an Anna Russell-like sketch of the production and the cast of characters. The ridiculous soap opera I'd imagined at the cafe the previous day had prepared me for that stellar moment in Branco's sports car. And when I finally recounted the dramatic and accidental death of Adam Pearce, Branco almost choked. "There was another one." "It was an accident," I repeated. "At least, that's what the local police say." The Alpha's engine roared as Branco downshifted into a tight curve. At the next stretch of straight road, he turned toward me. "What do you think?" he said as he kept his face on mine as though he wanted me to register all his strong, dark Mediterranean features at close range. I had to clear my throat before answering him. "After this morning, Lieutenant, I think Adam Pearce's death was a mistake, but it was no accident." Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.